All right, we're here with Professor Carl Woideck, and we're going to do a quick interview with him on jazz. Carl, could you describe kind of the evolution of jazz through big band up through the present?
Well, from the beginning of jazz, jazz was considered entertainment music. It was considered music that you dated to, that you danced to, all the things that we consider rock music to be today. That's what jazz was. And in the swing era in the 1930s, I mean, people courted to jazz, they met their buddies and danced to jazz and so forth. But in the 1940s, jazz kind of lost that connection with the audience where it was kind of a social music and it became maybe a little more self-consciously arty. And over time, jazz has gotten a reputation as being something that's kind of abstract and hard to understand. But jazz in its nature is very, very playful. The musicians play with their materials, with melody, harmony, and rhythm. And I think to some extent that's coming back. Certainly it was true during the fusion era when jazz musicians and rock musicians were interchanging a lot. This would be the end of the 60s and throughout the 70s. And I think there's something kind of comparable happening today.
Okay, and where do you kind of see it going from now?
Well, what you have today, among young musicians certainly, is that these are musicians who grew up with rock and hip hop. And they see nothing wrong with combining elements of the music they listen to as school kids or whatever with jazz. They find jazz to be technically challenging. They find it to be perhaps maybe a little deeper than some of the, let's face it, some pop music is pretty shallow.
Mm-hmm.
But so they find jazz very challenging, but they also want to integrate it with the music that they grew up loving. And so what you're getting today is young musicians who find no problem combining jazz improvisation with today's or recent rock and hip hop.
Okay, and with just kind of the integration, I know that a lot of people have said that it's kind of declining in popularity with kind of our generation.
Absolutely.
How would you say that's going, and how to get people more interested in more of the more classic jazz?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, Wynton Marsalis is a trumpeter, composer, band leader, the only person who has won Grammy Awards in both classical and jazz. And he's done a lot of outreach. He's done a lot of talking to students and a lot of educational outreach. And he's really tried to get people interested in classic jazz. His idea is that we have to know the culture of our elders. He thinks that our culture has become kind of a disposable culture where if something is 1 week old, then it has very little value. And of course, with the internet, that kind of thing where some video will go viral, but after about one day, all your friends have seen it and they're ready to move on to the next viral video. Well, we do have kind of a throwaway culture here. And Wynton Marsalis has a real sense that we have to really look at our elders and see how did we get here? What brought us here? And so he's responsible for more interest in older jazz. But the one thing that Marsalis doesn't address very carefully is what about today? After you're done honoring your elders, are you stuck at that point? So let's say you have an influential uncle or someone in your family or an older cousin or somebody who's influenced you or your grandparents or something like that. After you're done honoring them, does that mean that you have to forever imitate them? Well, not at all. And so that is one of the problems with Wynton Marsalis's message is what do you do today after you're done honoring all the wonderful things that have come before? And I think that today's artists, the ones who are comfortable with more recent pop music, they are kind of filling in that gap that Marsalis has not really addressed very carefully.
Gotcha. And would you have any type of advice to the class on getting into jazz, getting more popular into the movement, anything like that?
Well, that's a really good question. People might want to start out with listening to one of today's artists who is doing pop music. For example, Brad Mehldau is a pianist who not only does jazz improvisation, but also you'll see him doing covers of a song by Bjork or several pieces by Radiohead or something like that. Or, for example, there's a group called the Bad Plus, which is famous for their cover of Smells Like Teen Spirit. This might be one way to get started, is to look at a contemporary artist who feels comfortable with halfway recent pop music. Somebody who maybe has some hip-hop rhythms. But then there's the other thing, is history. I think our culture is not that interested in history. A lot of my students don't know how many senators we have, or who lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, or what were the issues that led us to the Civil War, or something like that. Well, if people are not interested in history, it's going to be very hard to get them to delve into musical history. So in that case, not a lot can be done. But what I would say is, go see jazz live, because you can see that we play music. Well, I think the verb play is very useful. We play with our materials, as I said earlier, melody, harmony, and rhythm. If just coming out of two speakers or out of your earbuds or your headphones or something like that, it may seem very, very abstract. But if you go to hear live jazz, you can see people interacting, and maybe see some younger jazz musicians and watch them interact. The pianist does something, you can tell that the drummer is responding. There's a lot of interaction in jazz, and that's not always true in pop music. For example, if you go to see an arena show of most bands, there's some exceptions, but let's say you're going to hear some famous rock band. If that arena show is the same arena show that was, let's say you catch them in Portland, it's the same show that was in San Francisco, the same show that was in Los Angeles. Tomorrow night they'll be in Seattle, whatever. There's not a lot of variance. The same thing is true with hip-hop. Once the drum machine gets started, a lot of what's going to happen is going to be the same every night. You go to see jazz and you realize they're playing with their materials, they're playing with melody, harmony, and rhythm. And I think that can be really involving, is to actually go see a jazz group, and if possible, possibly young jazz musicians, not just veteran jazz musicians who fit the old stereotype of, you're wearing a beautiful suit and everything's all cool and distinguished and so forth, but also, for example, here at the University of Oregon, every term, we have student jazz ensembles that play. Go see some people who are approximately your own age playing and see what they do.
Great. And just one last thing, if you'd like to throw in a little pitch where people can come and watch you play.
Okay, well, I have a quartet that plays at the Downtown Athletic Club in downtown Eugene. Even though it's an athletic club, one can go hear music without any kind of cover charge or without being a member. And so we play at the Downtown Athletic Club the third Saturday of each month. In July and August, usually they don't book music because I think people are outside having fun. It's beautiful weather and it stays light. But other than July and August, we're there the third Saturday of each month. We play from 8 to 11. And as I mentioned, there's no cover charge and you don't have to be a member, so the money that you would spend on cover charge, instead you can spend on some nachos or a nice dessert or some liquid or whatever. So that's a good place to catch us.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.